Mr. Nagy, Mr. Tibor, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, good afternoon, or wherever your listeners are. Wonderful to have be with you, and thank you very much.
It's our great delight to have you. We understand that you have been embarking on different tours within our Ambazonian community, and that's a laudable effort that is worth appreciating. Thank you for opting to join us in this exclusive discussion with Tapari King.
My
We
pleasure.
really do, you
No,
go
I
right
you know
ahead,
you
please.
know I'm willing to talk to just about anybody from Ambazonia about Ambazonia. So thank you again very much for having me.
Yeah, we have so much to talk about, and the fact is we really do not have enough time. So I wouldn't waste any second of your time. Straight away, you have confessed publicly that you're very passionate about Ambazonia as an oppressed people and about our movement for liberation. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, as your wonderful introduction mentioned, I had experience as deputy ambassador in Yaoundé. I was deputy to a very famous U.S. ambassador, Ambassador Francis Cook, and we were equally very passionate at the time about the democratic forces that were being unleashed in Cameroon. I got to know a lot of the key players quite well, including John Fruindi, Cardinal Toomey, some of the others. I did many, many trips to Southwest and Northwest. I climbed Mount Cameroon. We spent a lot of time in Bamenda, Buya, Limbe, other places. So I've been following Cameroon even after leaving it. And when I became Assistant Secretary of State, Cameroon was one of the top agenda items for me because of the brutality that the Yaoundé regime was exercising against the people of Northwest and Southwest provinces. Unfortunately, during my time as Assistant Secretary, we were not able to do much to relieve the suffering. And since I left the job as Assistant Secretary, the cause of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia remains one of several passions that I have where I will do everything possible to help the situation get much better.
That's quite amazing. Sometime early this month, you tweeted against ICG, International Crisis Group, suggestion. They've purported themselves as researchers who are interested in ensuring peace in different parts of the world. And this group would have to make a preposterous, if I would say, suggestion for Cameroon to reform whatever they gave to Ambazonia in 2019, and that's the special status. And you protested loudly against it on Twitter. That actually flattered me, and I guess that was where I thought we should have this discussion. Why exactly did you decide to protest against it, and what is in it that you think it's an entirely bad idea?
Here's the thing. I have been very careful to try and avoid advocating for any specific solution for Southern Cameroons because I know that there are many, many good people who are passionate about one of the various mechanisms, whether it's a real federation, whether it's independence, um, things like that. So I have avoided being in favor of any of those methods myself because my goal has always been the achievement of peace, justice, full human rights, full dignity of citizenship to the people of Southern Cameroon. However, however, the special status, in my view, is a government of Cameroon plan to basically confuse the people because, again, from what I have seen, the government of the Republic of Cameroon has not, up to now, had any serious intentions of providing for the full rights and privileges of the Southern Cameroonian people. That's why when I saw that that was being offered as a solution, I honestly could not support it in any way. If the government in Yaoundé was to show a different side, if they were to indicate any type of seriousness, then it would be different. But up to now, they have not. That's why, again, I don't like being prescriptive about mechanisms, but that one really struck out to me as not serious.
Yeah, and it would appear that Cameroon is um, behaving so arrogant, ignoring the fact that these were two states of equal status who came together, and nobody seemed to explain how the status of one side of an experiment, to be polite, or a failed union, where the status have gone. Have you been able to observe your approach from that standpoint?
Actually, no. I know the history, and I know that Southern Cameroonians are passionate about the history. But the point I have made over and over to my Southern Cameroonian friends, immaterial of what their own solution is that it's really important to not put the emphasis on the past, but to put it on the future. Because quite frankly, again, I have always done my best to tell the truth, to be direct, and now not to be diplomatic. But, the pages and pages and pages of history of what happened with this UN resolution, what happened in that plebiscite, where we are today is where we are today. And if the Southern Cameroonian leadership and the elites and the people want to resolve their problems and achieve their full dignity, then they really have to focus on the future instead of coming up with arguments that, well, once upon a time this happened, so it's the responsibility of the international community to all of a sudden create the state of Ambazonia and give it to us because, that would be nice, but honestly, it's not going to happen. So we can talk about science fiction and fantasy, or we can talk about reality. And, I have said this over and over, and I will keep saying it, that if the people of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia want to achieve their rights, they have to deal with the way the world is today.
Yeah, I'm happy you said what you said. They have to deal with the way the world is today. And one of the palams, if I would say, or the approach that the international community and the world goes about solving conflicts is by looking at the root causes of it. Now, for Southern Cameroonians to flip back through the pages and ask questions, our history was denied to be taught for us. There was probably a conspiracy or an evil mechanization to deny us of what actually began to us. If they are bringing that on the table of a discussion, don't you think is a smart way of looking? Permit me to use this scientific explanation since you don't want fiction. If you have HIV, for instance, are you going to cure the scabies on your body, or will you be looking to find how to eliminate the virus?
But also, if you have HIV, the important thing is not how you got HIV, it's how we cure HIV. As far as the international community is concerned, again, I'm being brutally honest. Whether your listeners like it or not, I believe in the truth. From the international community point of view, the problems of Southern Cameroon began in 2017. You know, and I know that the problems go way, 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 way back to German colonialism and even before. But if you want to deal with the solution, the international community started paying attention to Southern Cameroons when the lawyers strike, the teacher strikes, and the brutal response of the government happened in 2017.
Yeah, yeah. I think that like you've rightfully said, it has also been said that whatever happened in 2017 was just the immediate causes. I'm glad you said it using other words. It was the immediate causes of a problem, and therefore, um, caution must be exercised when providing solution. Prior to 2017, we've had Southern Cameroonian elites and leaders seeking to find a solution to this problem, which they never got until 2017, and now we have thousands of innocent lives being wasted. Don't you think diligence entails that the root cause of the problem is visited again as a way of drafting a proper way forward?
The root of the problem obviously impacts the types of solutions that people look at. But that's only for part of the audience. Because as I said, take a look at the world. Take a look at the quote unquote major crises that are happening right now. You know, you mentioned the international community, and I have said over and over again also, people don't want to hear this. There is no such thing as the international community because very rarely is there any form of unanimity amongst the major countries in the world on any particular issue. Look at Ukraine. Look at even what's happening in Sudan. The international community, certainly there's not unanimity in who they are supporting in Sudan or how they want the outcome to be in Sudan. So you have to deal with the fact that there is no international community per se, but you want to find a solution from among the major countries involved in any particular problem. So, that's what you have to deal with. It's not a matter of coming to the United Nations and dropping a 500-page study and saying we want our rights. It takes an awful, awful lot of work. And by the way, at the same time, you have people who are actually struggling for independence on the ground, much the way that American revolutionaries struggled on the ground to get us away from English colonization. So it's a multifaceted struggle, starting from the people who are sacrificing themselves in the bush and on the ground in Ambazonia to the intellectuals, the elites, others who are trying to do this, through the corridors of world powers.
Well, Mr. Nagy, now that you brought in Russia and Ukraine, I want to say, in light of Yaounde's clear tilt towards Russia since the invasion of Ukraine, would it not be correct for the Biden administration, if you were to advise, and I understand your top diplomat though on retirement, but you're still actively doing a lot of work. Won't it be a smart thing for the Biden administration to consider very strongly having more direct talks with Southern Cameroon's leadership?
I cannot speak for the U.S. government. I have to say that over and over again. As I said
And
when I
that's
was
why,
assistant,
and that's why I say
when I
your advice.
well, no, what I would advise when I was assistant secretary, I considered the Southern Cameroon problem a one of my major agenda items. Unfortunately, even at that time within the US government, it was very, very difficult to get other people to pay attention to it. Uh, Even members of Congress, I found a few key members of Congress who were interested, but most members of Congress were not. And this goes back to another issue that I think we need to discuss, and that is the disunity amongst the Cameroonian diaspora, the Southern Cameroon diaspora outside of Southern Cameroons, because you're absolutely right. You know, if the Cameroon government was going to really want to get the attention of the United States at this point in a very bad way, they would make a deal with Wagner mercenaries to do something, in Yaoundé. If they were to do something like that, I promise you, they would immediately get the very high level attention of the US government. But, failing that, you look around the continent, you look at the various crises going on, and I have said before, again, being brutally honest, that Washington only has capability to give attention to, in the African continent, maybe 3 or 4 crises at any one time. Beyond that, people just don't see it because it's not taking up the kind of attention that, say, Sudan, even Eastern Congo, the Sahel, Somalia, when we had the Tigray War. Those are the things that are grabbing the headlines. And I'll add one other thing. The poor person in Bafut who is killed is dead. It doesn't matter to him or to her whether it's a major crisis or a minor crisis, but that poor innocent individual is still dead, just as much as people are in a major crisis. That's why, for me, the cause in Southern Cameroons remains a real passion.
Amazing. I'm going to bring you back into a discussion that we have already scratched on it. I understand you speak very good French and understand it as well. This
Pas
is
vraiment.
what, bon, quand même, on va essayer. Même moi, je ne parle pas très bien. But it's important that for us to understand Biya's ideology and La République du Cameroon's ideology, the way they look at the people of Ambazonia, we may try to see if we have some understanding of their language. Maybe you should listen to this. I'm sure you would have watched it. And then we will react to it. Stay tuned.
On avait la possibilité de les intégrer directement dans le système francophone, qui était celui de la majorité du peuple, 80%. Mais je crois que les pays sont soucieux aujourd'hui d'affirmer leur identité. Et c'est pour ça que nous mettons sur pied un statut spécial qui reconnaît la spécificité de la zone anglo.
Well, I would say that is enough. I'm sure you might have watched this, and you might have also seen the way Southern Cameroonians, Ambazonians react to those utterances. Some would say God helped him to use his own mouth to say it.
Yeah,
Mr. Nagy,
when I was watching that, I thought to myself that, for example, the Canadians, which is the exact almost percentage as Cameroon in the opposite direction, where they have 80% francophone, Anglophone and 20% francophone, they would never ever accept, such a thing. One of the things that I have said over and over again, and I even said this to the Cameroonian government people, I said, it's a very sad state of affairs when you have a president of a bilingual country who cannot even make a speech in the second language. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, what Mr. Biya was saying there is their master calculation not to have a friendship or a partnership or a union of two equal states, but to assimilate
Yeah.
uh, a
Yeah.
whole nation who came.
Yeah.
So that's and you may now understand the emotion of Ambazonians who may want to reject some fair ideas that people like you would propose. You have made a suggestion that the people on the ground, and I've heard you say a couple of times even here, are facing the brunt of the war, and you would like them to make their own decision. And you thought that a referendum is an option. Mr. Nach, I want to ask you before we get into the intricacies involved with the referendum. I'd like to know, how do you think that can be executed legally in during such a time?
My thinking is not so much the mechanism. As I said before, I am much more interested in achieving justice, dignity, liberty, fairness for the people of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. Referendum is not the goal. Referendum would be a mechanism. And the only reason I cite referendum, it's one possibility. I look at historical cases, and the history I look at specifically related to Africa, but there's obviously others. Referendum is not mutually exclusive from other mechanisms. If I look at the United States of America, the way the United States of America achieves independence is fighting for it, winning the war, and then negotiating the outcome directly with the British. If I look more at Africa, say, let's look at Eritrea. Uh, the Eritreans and the Tigrayans fought the Mengistu regime. They eventually chased them out of Addis Ababa. They took over the country, but the Eritreans wanted independence. So they conducted a referendum, and overwhelmingly, the Eritreans people, voted to leave, and they created their own country. SPLA, SPLM, South Sudan fought a very, very long civil war against the Sudanese, the northern Sudanese. It was a stalemate for most of it. They liberated a lot of territories, but at the end of the day, the Sudanese government agreed to a referendum. They conducted a referendum, and the South Sudanese voted, I think, 98%, something like that, for independence. If you look back further, even a country such as Norway, they had a union with Sweden, and there was an election in the early 1900s, a referendum, and they voted to disassociate, to dissolve the union, and to create their own country. So in history, referendums have been combined with other mechanisms to achieve independence, so that you have countries that may have de facto independence, but to get the what's called de jure independence, sometimes a referendum is required so that the global community says, okay, the people on the ground voted for it, so we will recognize it. There is another interesting case right now in Africa, which in a little bit parallels the situation in Ambazonia, and that's the case of Somaliland. Somaliland, British Somaliland, and Italian Somaliland joined together to form the nation of Somalia. British Somaliland became independent first. After Siad Barre was overthrown, the Somalilanders very much wanted independence. They fought for it. They achieved it. They have now been running their own state very successfully for 20 some years, even longer. And yet the only country in the world that recognizes Somaliland happens to be Taiwan, because the Africa Union has its own dynamics why they don't do it, other countries don't do it. And yet Somaliland is at least as successful a nation as most other nations, around them. So it's a complicated situation, but often a referendum is a very good means to get the international community's acceptance of the state's being.
Do you realize, Mr. Nach, that all the examples you have mentioned, none of them really have a typical story? Eritrea, Sudan, Somaliland, that can be likened to case of Southern Cameroon. First of all, we understand that the two countries, Southern Cameroons and French Cameroon, were UN trusteeship territories. We cannot talk our stories without necessarily linking it with our past. And these two category B trusteeship territories came into an experimental union of two equal status. Now, the union was not done rightfully, it didn't work. Yaoundé themselves cannot even explain how their gendarmes invaded Southern Cameroons, and so on and so forth. This is history we are aware. The United Nations Charter is in contravention of the procedures that were employed to lead us to where we are today. There is no treaty of union existing anywhere. And a lot of people argue that Cameroon has simply invaded or annexed the former British Southern Cameroons, meaning there is a culprit, there is a crime. We're talking about illegality. And I understand that there are two ways of handling illegality, either in a courtroom or out of a courtroom via a negotiation. How do you want a people who feel cheated of independence and who are requesting for justice to be preconditioned with a referendum as a way to determine their future?
So how would you then fix the situation?
We think that the powers that be should simply respect their own laws.
Yeah, how
Don't you
would that
think,
happen?
to set the right precedents? Because if it is not properly handled, you can have another French Cameroon somewhere else doing just the exact same thing. To set a precedence in a world that we're trying to build a global village and a peaceful, global, prosperous village, don't you think it would be right for the legality and historicity to be addressed with some form of honesty?
You're discussing academics and philosophy, not practicalities. I always get back to the point
I'd like
how
to know why. I would like to know why it's not practical. That's exactly what I'm trying to know. Because
that's why I'm asking you. So who will do it? How will it happen?
the same actors now, in Kasna Nyangwe's book, he accuses the United Kingdom for departing or conspiring and not doing it, or not handling the situation rightfully. The United Nations is talking very loudly about Sudan today. And unfortunately, the United Nations doesn't seem to speak the way we expected them, cognizant of an experiment that they initiated that has failed. We just think that authorities that be, to save more lives, should respect their own laws. Isn't that just an honest and simple approach?
Yeah, but I get back to my question. As I said at the beginning, I'm not committed to any mechanism. I'm committed to the outcome. But your approach, from what you're saying, how would it actually be done in
The
today's
first
world?
thing President Sako has suggested is for a negotiated settlement without preconditions. Is it so difficult, for instance, for the actors in the world to oblige La République du Cameroon? Is it too difficult to oblige La République du Cameroon to meet Ambazonia on the table and let discussions begin?
It will never happen.
Why?
If that's what we're counting on, then you will be having the same discussion in 20 years, not with me because I may be gone by then, but with somebody else. Exactly the same point. There is no country in the world that is going to say to the Republic of Cameroon, you sit down with the people of Southern Cameroons and decide on how you're going to divorce.
Okay, the word divorce there is probably an overstatement because in the United States of America, a marriage is confirmed and sealed when there is a marriage certificate. Do you think, in fact, there is no treaty of union that binds the former British Southern Cameroons to the Ambazonia and La République du Cameroun. That is an open secret. So why do the world and the United Nations and all the authorities that seek to talk about different things, why would they despise this act of illegality and a belligerent occupation from an occupier like French Cameroon?
Because the world doesn't care.
It's wrong then for Southern Cameroonians to say this is an international conspiracy.
The world doesn't care. That's why I told you early on, I look at the world the way it is. I don't look at it through rose-colored glasses. And what I think about and what I care about is how do we achieve what we want to achieve in today's world. That's why I sometimes shake my head at, these wonderful, actually judicial, legal, philosophically correct arguments that are not going to achieve anything.
Okay, Mr. Nach, I'm going to ask you the last question and probably open the line so we can take some calls and reactions from the